Hello and welcome to the Intentional Brief, your weekly video update on the one big thing in cybersecurity news for middle market companies, their investors, and executive teams. I'm your host, Shay Colson, managing partner at Intentional Cybersecurity, and you can find us online at intentionalcyber.com. Today is Monday, December 29th, 2025, and as we close out this year, I think it's probably a good idea to look back at 5 reflections for 2025 on the past year's worth of intentional briefs. We'll do some predictions next week in the first week of 2026. But let's look at the 5 themes across all 52 weeks worth of updates. The first, most consistent and most recurring, was that third-party risk became truly existential this year. If you don't recall every single episode, we opened the year with the Beyond Trust breach that gave Chinese attackers access to treasury systems, and we closed it with Mixpanel exposing data from SoundCloud, OpenAI, and Pornhub. In between, the hits just kept on coming. PowerSchool's breach of 62 million students happened in May when attackers began extorting individual school districts despite the ransom being paid by PowerSchool. Oracle had back-to-back breaches when they actively denied the first one, and then the second one popped. Insight Partners confirmed that LP and portfolio company data had been stolen. SalesLoft's OAuth tokens were compromised via their GitHub, giving attackers legitimate-looking access to downstream customer data. And in week 2 of the year, we posed the question, when does this breach become our breach? And that proved to be the defining frame, I think, for the year. OWASP updated their software supply chain failures into the 2025 top 10, validating the reality of this trend. And Verizon's DBIR put some data behind it when it was released, indicating that third parties now account for 30% of all breaches. The lesson that we continually came back to that really emerged and became clear this year is while you can outsource the capability, you cannot outsource the responsibility. And that means knowing which of your vendors hold the most sensitive data, building incident response playbooks for these type of incidents, enforcing contractual obligations where they can, and then maintaining your own logs and key rotation capabilities because the vendors generally aren't, won't, or can't do it for you. The second big theme that we saw this year is that really, in a lot of ways, you are on your own in this journey. Federal cyber support didn't just erode in 2025, it retreated to basically nothing. CISA faced cuts of more than half of its staff and 40% of its contractors. CVE funding nearly died, and it got an 11-month extension on the day it was supposed to expire. We're going to fight that fight again in 2026. The MS ISAC and the election ISAC both lost their funding. Regional CISA leaders departed. Chris Krebs was targeted by an executive order and left Sentinel-1 to fight back. Cyber Command was ordered to stand down from Russia planning, and State Department officials stopped naming Russia as a threat. The information sharing law known as CISA 2015 faced expiration, and an executive order pushed resilience responsibility down to states who are already struggling with budget cuts, even in well-funded states. As one industry voice put it, quote, without the federal government's ecosystem of infrastructure protection, we're essentially on our own, unquote. And I think Mike Hamilton gets it right. So the message to defenders really needs to be that you need to plan accordingly because the cavalry is not coming, and it is up to you to build your own threat intelligence, build your own patching capabilities, build your own incident response capabilities, and then communicate with your trusted partners, peers, and people because the basics are now what matters more than ever because institutional support behind those capabilities is withdrawn, if not completely eliminated. The third theme that we saw this year is that attackers are not breaking in, they're logging in. The attack surface has shifted decisively towards identity and the human piece in 2025. Of course, we remember Scattered Spider, who became kind of the threat actor of the year, not through technical sophistication, of course, but through relentless social engineering. They hit UK retailers in May. We had Marks and Spencer staff sleeping on floors and communicating via WhatsApp as their systems stayed down. They moved into US insurance companies in June, then airlines in July. There were some arrests made in the UK, and these young people, aged 17 to 20, really became the poster children of these social engineering attacks. And Scattered Spider was just one of the many in this space. Clorox, you may remember, had a lawsuit that revealed the full transcripts of their help desk calls where they ended up being breached just by asking to have credentials reset with MFA re-enrolled, and that cost them $380 million because of that one procedural failure. Coinbase discovered that their outsourced support staff in Southeast Asia had been bribed for access. North Korean operatives landed remote jobs at more U.S. tech companies now than ever, routing those connections through the domestic laptop farms. We saw zero-day exploits be sold to Russian brokers by a U.S. threat developer. Twin brothers previously convicted of hacking who got rehired as contractors for the government and wiped 96 databases. And we're seeing this play out in the data as well, with the Verizon DBIR confirming that 60% of breaches still involve human interaction and that 84% of SaaS incidents bypassed MFA entirely. So the defenders need to respond here by hardening your help desk, harden your verification procedures, test through social engineering, make sure that's in your pen test for this next year, deploy phish-resistant MFA for privileged accounts, if not all accounts, and recognize that your people and their identities are now your primary attack surface. It is not your edge, your network, or your endpoints. The fourth theme of the year, of course, and we buried it down here because I can't keep leading with it, is AI. But in this case, it was signal versus noise rather than just volume and velocity. The AI conversation in cyber was loud in 2025, to say the least, but there was often a lot of noise over the top of any clear signal. We started the year with DeepSeek releasing a new version, R1, that caused everybody to freak out a little bit and rebaseline the capabilities, not because of the AI-powered attacks, but because that we were already using these tools and having data flow to places that we did not control or could not see. That shadow AI risk proved to be a real story. We saw a report this year from BugCrowd reporting that 93% of organizations using AI tools had introduced new attack vectors by doing so. Zscaler faced some scrutiny, as you may recall, from using 3 trillion customer logs per week to train their own AI models. Researchers discovered phishing emails with prompt injections targeting AI-based email filters. So we've got the AI themselves being attacked now to exploit both the humans and these defensive tools with a single message. Browser-based AI agents from both ChatGPT and Perplexity launched about the same week, and they were both immediately found to be vulnerable to prompt injection, spoofed sidebars, and OAuth token theft. And then in November, Anthropic published that blog post about a Chinese espionage campaign that leveraged Claude, but kept the details a little high level, and essentially kind of came to the conclusion that the operation still required significant human expertise, that it kept humans in the loop, that it had some challenges around hallucinations, and actually had a relatively low success rate against its 30-plus target. And Ars Technica analysis of AI-generated malware found that samples were easy to detect, they used known methods, and they required no new defenses. So the real takeaway, I think, for 2025 with AI in cyber is that it's accelerating attack workflows and lowering the barrier to entry, but it's not yet producing novel capabilities. That's also probably true for AI in the rest of the enterprise. I think the bigger risk remains your own people using AI without guardrails, building in not only shadow AI, but this kind of security debt that you can't see. So I would encourage you to build paved paths, get visibility through enterprise AI tools or using a CASB solution or something similar, and then treat AI agents from a threat perspective like an insider threat, which functionally that's really what they are. The fifth and final theme is, should be no surprise to regular viewers, resilience through fundamentals. Every theme that we've talked about this year pointed back to the same conclusion, that the basics matter more now than ever, and as complexity increases, we need to foundationally rely on these blocking and tackling components. The asset inventory components remained a fundamental challenge. Again, patching is very important, very hard to do, and very hard to do quickly and at scale, which is something that we're seeing the need for in a really increased way. CISA had an emergency directive on Cisco vulnerabilities in September that became kind of a real-time tutorial about why patching matters. The velocity became really proven to be critical as we saw a report that over half of the CISA Kev list were being weaponized and used in the wild within 48 hours. So you've got less than 2 days to get everything patched once it hits that list. Again, MFA is important, but it also is insufficient on its own. Recall the report that 84% of attacks on SaaS breaches did not use MFA or did not bypass it. Again, stolen OAuth tokens, other things are getting them in. The BBC ran a story claiming a weak password took down a 158-year-old company. But really, I think the lesson is that if one compromised credential can take down your whole business, you have not built the resilience that you need in 2025. Defense in depth and diversity of defense became the kind of strategic recurring frame. It's something I use often, not just here in these videos, but also with clients. Deter where possible, detect early, disrupt before there's too much damage. We can't eliminate all of these threats. That's just impossible. I think the goal for us should be making our organization a hard target when attackers are optimizing for efficiency. They're running like a business just like we are. This means if we have validated backups, tested playbooks, practice our tabletops, have robust hardened help desk procedures that actually get followed, and have sufficient logging and capabilities to, again, deter, detect, and disrupt these threats, then we're really ahead of the game in terms of staying safe and staying resilient as an enterprise. None of this is glamorous, right? This is not sexy AI next gen stuff, but it is extremely necessary. I think as we see a continual withdrawal of federal support and third-party breaches mounting, attackers targeting the identities, these fundamentals are no longer just checklist items. They actually can serve a strategic purpose, and controlling your controllables is something I say often here. I say to clients, I say to my kids, because really I think that is the play for 2025 into 2026. We will cover some predictions as we get into next week, but looking back, there's plenty of themes to reflect on as we close out the year. From a fundraising perspective in 2025, I'd flag the theme as the money kept moving. The year was really defined by uncertainty. Again, the federal pullback on both regulation and cyber support, geopolitical tension, tariff wars, government shutdowns, a cold IPO market. There was quite a lot to be uncertain about. But I found private equity fundraising efforts to really rise above those challenges. I think the numbers tell the story. Roughly 200 billion in Q1, 196 in Q2, dropped a little in Q3, 161 billion across the globe. No surprise that Q3 is the lightest, and roared back to 242 billion in Q4, which brought us to just shy of 600 billion in total commitments. The secondaries market dominated the landscape with large raises from Ardian, EQT, ICG, and Apollo, all raising multi-billion-dollar funds to buy stakes from LPs seeking liquidity. The IPO window generally stayed closed. Klarna got delayed. Figma's big pop collapsed within weeks, pushing us more into these continuation vehicles or GP-led transactions. And by the end of the year, the industry is still sitting on an estimated 2.1 trillion in dry powder. That led some folks to become a little darker and a little more critical. We saw Brookfield's CEO suggest that there should be 4,000 less PE firms. Apollo's president warned that many PE firms have just raised their most recent fund and didn't realize it's their last fund. The Journal declared a fundraising slump even as Q4 posted the biggest quarter of the year, and Fortune reported that the US GDP would have been 0.1% if it wasn't of growth, if it wasn't driven by AI. So both things can be true here. I think there is both a massive capital deployment and some existential questions around sustainability, both in the market and with the AI influence. For cyber, the implications cut both ways. The dry powder means we're going to continue to see M&A activity, which means integration risk, increased vulnerabilities, and exposure to the kind of net new tech stacks that can let folks like the Akira ransomware gang leverage sonic wall devices to get into new enterprises that previously didn't have them, didn't defend against them, don't know how to patch them. We're seeing this already happen with some clients, and it's not going to slow down in 2026. I think it's actually going to become rising to the level of portfolio risk for some larger players. The wheel doesn't stop here, and neither do the threats that come with it. As a reminder, as we close out the year, you can find links to all the articles that we covered below. You can find back issues of these videos and written transcripts at intentionalcyber.com, and we will see you next week in 2026 for a new year and a new edition of the Intentional Brief.